He deleted my name from my wife's foundation website, the one I built with her over 40 years. Dad, he said, leaning back in his leather chair, you're not the face of this charity anymore. You'll embarrass the donors. Embarrass the donors. That was how my own son erased me from his mother's life's work, with one cold corporate sentence. See, I'm Samuel Reed, 74 years old, born and raised in Seattle, Washington. For 35 years, I worked as an aerospace engineer, the kind who spent weekends buried in blueprints and weekdays buried in deadlines. But my wife Eleanor, she spent those same years building something more human, a small scholarship fund that eventually became the Eleanor Reed Scholarship Trust, a foundation helping students from low-income families study medicine. When Eleanor died last year after a brutal 18-month fight with breast cancer, I thought the only way to keep breathing was to keep her legacy alive. So I turned to our son Michael, our only child, our pride. He was sharp Stanford MBA, all charm and marketing polish. He offered to modernize the foundation. He said, "Dad, you've done enough. Let me take it from here." I didn't realize that take it from here meant take it from you. Eleanor and I met in 1973 in a church library. She was tutoring underprivileged kids after class, and I was fixing a broken projector. She said faith wasn't about sitting in pews. It was about what you built for others. That was her kind of love, practical, patient, pure. We started the Scholarship Trust in 1984 with our own savings, just $7,200. By the time she passed, it had grown into a $3.8 million endowment. It wasn't just money. It was our story written in tuition checks and graduation caps. After the funeral, Michael insisted the foundation needed a fresh image. He brought in designers, PR consultants, even influencers. I didn't object. I thought maybe that was how the next generation showed love. But one Tuesday morning, I opened the foundation website. My name, Samuel and Eleanor Reed Scholarship Trust, had become the Eleanor Reed Legacy Foundation. No and Samuel. No mention of the man who'd written every check, balanced every ledger, drafted every trust clause with his own hands. When I asked Michael what happened, he smiled like a CEO explaining a business decision. "Dad, donors want youth, not nostalgia. You represent the past. We're building the future." He said it so smoothly that for a second I almost believed him. Then I saw the press release, founded by Michael Reed, honoring the vision of his late mother. No mention of me. 40 years of shared faith, sweat, and purpose wiped out with one rebrand. That night, I sat alone in Eleanor's old study, the one with the cedar shelves. She loved the smell of her favorite vanilla candles, still faint in the air. Her picture sat on the desk beside the first scholarship certificate we ever printed. I stared at it for a long time and said out loud, "He erased me, Ellie. He erased us." Maybe you've known that feeling the moment someone you raised starts treating you like an inconvenience, not with cruelty, but with polite business-like dismissal. It hurts more than anger, because it's cold, calculated. Still, I didn't react. Old engineers don't explode, we observe, we plan. If my son thought he could rewrite his mother's story to suit his ego, he didn't know the kind of man she married. Before we go further, I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Seattle, Texas, London, wherever you are, tell me in the comments. Because betrayal might look different in every language, but the silence of being erased sounds the same everywhere. I turned off the computer, leaned back in Eleanor's chair, and whispered a prayer she taught me decades ago. Lord, give me the strength not to seek revenge, but to protect what's sacred. I didn't know then that prayer would soon lead me straight into a battle of law, legacy, and faith. A battle that would cost my son everything he thought he owned. The betrayal didn't come with shouting. It came with silence, a series of quiet edits, missing names, and invisible hands moving numbers I couldn't see. After that night in Eleanor's study, I tried to convince myself it was just branding. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe donors wanted youth and Polish. But then small things began to vanish. The first was the plaque in the foundation lobby, a bronze rectangle we'd unveiled together 20 years ago. Founded by Samuel and Eleanor Reed, 1984. One morning I stopped by the office on Pine Street and saw a new one. Established by Eleanor Reed. Directed by Michael Reed. No Samuel, no husband, no partner. Just a footnote scrubbed from history. When I asked the receptionist, she hesitated before saying, "Mr. Reed, Mr. Michael said it was part of the redesign. Mr. Michael." My own son had trained staff to address him formally. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I asked to see the latest financial reports, something I'd reviewed every quarter since 1984. She looked nervous. "You'll have to email accounting. Everything's digital now." Digital meant locked behind passwords I no longer had. That night I called Michael. He answered from what sounded like a rooftop bar, music thumping, wind whipping through his Bluetooth headset. "Dad, it's late." "What's wrong? The foundation plaque," I said. "My name's gone." "It's just a branding adjustment," he replied. "You're still the founder in spirit." "Spirit doesn't sign checks, Michael. You worry too much. It's just modern strategy." He said it like I was an elderly man confusing progress with betrayal. But I could hear the strain in his voice, a hint of guilt or fear, I couldn't tell which. 2 days later, I received an automated alert from the bank, $400,000 transferred out of the endowment's primary account. The recipient, Reed Strategic Media LLC, a company I'd never heard of. I looked it up online, registered 3 months earlier under Michael's name. The next morning, I drove downtown to the foundation's new glass and steel office. The staff greeted me politely but avoided eye contact. Michael's assistant, a young woman with red lipstick and trembling hands, whispered, "Mr. Reed, he's in a meeting." "I'll wait," I said. 40 minutes later, my son walked out wearing a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than our first house mortgage. He smiled like a politician and extended his hand. "Dad, you should have called." "I did," I replied. "You didn't answer." We went into his office, minimalist, cold, all white marble and chrome. No photo of Eleanor, not one. "Why did $400,000 move from the trust?" I asked. He sighed, exasperated. "It's a marketing reinvestment. We're building brand partnerships, exposure multiplies donations. You wouldn't understand modern philanthropy." "I understand math," I said. "And I understand theft." His eyes hardened. "Don't throw words like that around. You'll make people nervous." People. He meant donors, employees, anyone but me. That evening, I returned home to the quiet hum of the grandfather clock Eleanor's father had built. I poured a cup of coffee and opened the file cabinet we kept under lock and key. Inside, I found the original trust deed Eleanor drafted herself in 2017. She'd written it in blue ink, her teacher's handwriting, looping neatly across every margin. Clause 14. C caught my eye. If the successor trustee, Michael Reed, acts against the foundation's charitable mission, full discretionary control returns to the surviving spouse, Samuel Reed. It was there, a silent shield Eleanor had placed years before, just in case. She'd always said, "I trust Michael to do the right thing, but I trust God to give you discernment." That line echoed in my head while I traced her handwriting with my thumb. Discernment. Not revenge, not fury, discernment. I knew what I had to do. But before I moved, I needed proof. I called Janet Hollis, the estate attorney, who helped Eleanor set up the trust. She picked up after 2 rings. Sam, I thought you'd call sooner, she said. You knew I suspected. Your wife warned me this could happen. She asked me to watch over you if Michael ever lost his way. The next morning, Janet met me in my kitchen with her laptop and a stack of old files. Within hours, she uncovered the trail: 5 unauthorized transfers, marketing fees, strategic consulting, digital exposure, all paid to companies owned by Michael. She looked up, eyes full of both pity and admiration. Sam, Eleanor built this fortress for a reason. You're legally protected, but she also left the moral choice to you. That night I sat by the window watching rain streak down the glass like thin silver threads. Seattle always felt lonelier when it rained. I reached for Eleanor's Bible on the end table and opened to her bookmarked page Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. I whispered, All right, Ellie, I'll defend what you built, and I'll do it the way you would have, with faith, not fury. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, I had a plan that would test both my patience and my son's conscience. He'd wanted control. He was about to get a lesson in what true stewardship meant. When dawn broke over the sound, the city looked washed clean. Gulls cut through the gray sky, and for the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I felt something steady inside me: purpose. She had left me a map, and Michael had already taken the first wrong turn. Janet and I met again that morning in her office, a narrow wood-paneled space that smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. Stacks of folders sat on her mahogany desk, each labeled in Eleanor's tidy blue handwriting. She had kept records of everything: board meetings, donation receipts, even the handwritten thank you notes from students whose tuition we'd paid. Your wife was meticulous, Janet said, sliding a binder toward me. She built a fortress, Sam. The kind of legal structure only someone who truly understood people would design. Inside the binder were documents labeled Tier 2 Trust Contingency Clause Activation. It was the secondary fund Eleanor had quietly created, accessible only if the Foundation's mission was compromised. In short, it gave me the legal right to seize control if Michael ever turned the charity into a vanity project. I ran my fingers over Eleanor's signature, pressed deep into the parchment. She'd foreseen every step. What she couldn't have foreseen was that the threat would come from her own son. That afternoon, I called Michael's accounting manager, pretending to be reviewing tax filings. Old men make excellent spies. No one suspects we understand spreadsheets. By evening, Janet had traced more payments: luxury hotel charges in Los Angeles, a $19,000 strategic retreat, and invoices for media consultation from companies that existed only on paper. Michael wasn't running a charity anymore. He was laundering his mother's legacy into his lifestyle. I didn't explode. Instead, I opened a yellow notepad and began writing date of transfer amount, receiving entity, purpose, document, evidence. When engineers go to war, we don't fight with fists, we fight with records. 2 days later, I visited Rainier Capital Bank, where the foundation accounts were held. The branch manager, a soft-spoken man named Paul, greeted me warmly. He remembered Eleanor. Everyone did. She'd sent Christmas cards to every teller for 20 years. Mr. Reed, what brings you in today? A question about the trust, I said. Tier 2. His eyebrows lifted. Few people even knew it existed. He excused himself to verify access permissions. 10 minutes later, he returned holding a manila folder and said quietly, Sir, according to this, as of any verified breach of charter purpose, full control reverts to you, effective immediately upon confirmation. Effective immediately. Those words carried the weight of 40 years of love and work. Paul leaned forward, lowering his voice. Would you like us to begin an internal review of recent withdrawals? No, I said. Not yet. Let him think the fortress is still sleeping. That night I went home to the cedar-scented quiet of our house. The rain had stopped and light from the street lamps glowed through Eleanor's lace curtains. I sat at her old roll-top desk, opened a notebook, and began writing her a letter, something I'd started doing when grief felt too heavy to say out loud. Ellie, he's losing himself. You saw this before I did. But you also left me tools. I'll use them not to destroy him, but to save what's still good. I sealed the letter and placed it beside her photograph. Then I called Janet. It's time, I said. You're ready to act, not yet publicly, but we'll prepare everything. The gala's coming up in 2 weeks, isn't it? Yes. October 10th. The donors, the press, all eyes on him. Perfect, I said. That's when we wake the fortress. The following days I played my part, quiet, courteous, invisible. I attended the volunteer meetings, smiled through donor luncheons, and listened while Michael spoke about innovation and modern philanthropy like he'd invented generosity. Behind the scenes, Janet compiled financial statements, notarized copies, and digital screenshots. Every false invoice, every unauthorized wire transfer, documented, time-stamped, ready. I kept one folder for myself. Inside it, a single note from Eleanor written in blue ink. If the mission ever loses its soul, remember money is just metal and paper. What we protect is faith. Those words steadied me every time anger threatened to rise. This wasn't about revenge. It was about stewardship. About honoring the woman who believed that legacy wasn't inherited, it was lived. The day before the gala, I visited Eleanor's grave at the Hillside Cemetery, overlooking Lake Washington. I brought her favorite lilies and placed them under the small granite stone that read, Eleanor Reed, teacher, mother, builder of hope. I know what you'd say, I whispered. Handle it quietly. With dignity. Let truth speak for itself. A gust of wind swept through the trees, scattering yellow leaves across the path. It felt like an answer. I knelt, pressed my hand against the cool stone, and prayed softly. Lord, guide me tomorrow. Let justice rise without bitterness. Let love stay stronger than pride. When I stood, I felt calm. The kind of calm that comes not from winning, but from knowing you're standing exactly where you're meant to be. Tomorrow night, the ballroom lights would shine on Michael. The cameras would capture every smile, every toast. And behind all that glamour, a quiet storm would start to turn a father, reclaiming not just a fortune, but his wife's faith in what was right. The Four Seasons ballroom gleamed like a cathedral of glass and gold that night. Crystal chandeliers hung above 200 guests in tuxedos and satin gowns. On the screens looping around the room, Eleanor's smiling face played in slow motion, but cropped, so that my hand holding hers never appeared. The Eleanor Reed Legacy Gala was supposed to honor 40 years of charity work. But the moment I walked through the doors, I knew it was a coronation, Michael's coronation. He stood on stage beside a marble podium, all confidence and cologne, with a wireless mic and the kind of smile that photographs well but means nothing. Behind him, the new foundation logo glowed. Eleanor Reed Legacy Foundation, directed by Michael Reed. No founded by Samuel and Eleanor, no family partnership, just my son remaking his mother's dream in his own image. I took a seat at the far corner table beside the floral arrangements Eleanor used to design herself. A few old donors recognized me and nodded politely, most didn't. To them, I was just another gray-haired man in a rented tux. The host began reading a prepared speech about visionary leadership and modern compassion. When he announced Michael as the evening's keynote speaker, applause filled the hall. Michael stepped forward, lifted his glass of champagne, and said, "Tonight we celebrate not just what my mother started, but what this new generation will finish. Finish. The word rang like a bell tolling for everything Eleanor built. I glanced toward the back of the room where Janet Hollis stood quietly near the catering doors holding her briefcase. We didn't need words, just a nod. Our documents were ready. The Tier 2 activation papers, the financial audits, the trust control declaration, all signed, sealed, and waiting for the right moment. Janet whispered earlier that day. Once the gala officially concludes, and he accepts funds under false representation, the clause triggers automatically. Meaning, the second he took money under Eleanor's name for personal use, everything reverted to me by law. So I sat there watching him dig his own grave with every word. The screen behind him flashed a slide labeled Major Donors and New Partnerships. Logos of tech firms, luxury brands, and pharmaceutical sponsors rotated in a neat carousel. Each partnership came with six-figure consulting fees routed through Reed Strategic Media LLC, the same shell company that had already siphoned $400,000. Michael continued, "We're entering a new era of impact. My mother believed in legacy, and I believe in evolution. Together we'll change philanthropy for the modern world." People clapped. Cameras flashed. And in that blinding light, I suddenly understood Eleanor's brilliance. She hadn't just built a trust. She'd built a test. After the applause died down, the MC called for a moment of silence in memory of Mrs. Reed. Everyone bowed their heads. I closed my eyes, not in grief this time, but in gratitude for the woman who'd prepared me for this exact night. Then the silence broke. A donor stepped up with a check, a ceremonial donation of $1 million to the foundation. Michael accepted it with a broad smile, posing for photos as flashes lit up the stage. "Thank you," he said into the microphone. "This gift ensures my mother's vision lives on." That was the moment. The instant he accepted funds under misrepresentation, the contingency clause came alive. Janet texted one word to my phone, activated. The fortress had awakened. I didn't need to say anything. The law would do the talking. By the time Michael toasted champagne with the board, the bank servers had already updated. Every dollar, every asset, every share of authority, now listed under one trustee, Samuel Reed. I sat there quietly, hands folded, while the crowd celebrated the empire he no longer owned. When the event ended, I slipped away before the closing music faded. I didn't need applause. Justice doesn't make noise, it simply arrives on time. Outside Seattle, rain began to fall again, soft and cleansing. The valet brought my car around, and as I got in, I caught one last glimpse of Michael through the glass doors, shaking hands, smiling, oblivious. I whispered, "You wanted to lead her legacy son. Tomorrow, you'll learn what leadership really costs." On the drive home, the wipers whispered across the windshield, in rhythm with my thoughts. I remembered Eleanor's words from the last night we spent together in the hospital. "If he ever forgets what we built this for, don't shout. Just show him the truth." That's what tomorrow would be, not revenge, not humiliation, just truth. Back home, I placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of Eleanor's favorite red wine Merlot from Yakima Valley, the one we used to share every anniversary. I looked up at her photo on the mantel and said softly, "He thinks he's inherited your dream, Ellie. He doesn't know he's about to inherit your lesson." Before heading to bed, I opened her worn Bible again. The verse she'd underlined years ago still glowed faintly in pencil. "Faith without works is dead." Tomorrow my faith would work through signatures, through silence, through the unbreakable logic of the woman who built a legacy no one could steal. If you're still here listening through this far, type 1 in the comments. Because sometimes the quietest battles are the ones fought for faith, for dignity, and for truth. The morning after the gala, Seattle shimmered with post-rain sunlight. Downtown glowed like glass washed clean. Inside my kitchen, the coffee pot hissed just the way Eleanor liked it, and my phone buzzed with the message I'd been waiting for. From Janet Hollis, subject Tire 2. Activation confirmed. Body all accounts reverted. Primary trustee Samuel Reed, effective 7 a.m. I exhaled slowly. After months of watching Michael strip his mother's name from the charity the fortress Eleanor built, was finally awake. The numbers didn't lie. He'd accepted restricted funds under false representation, the one act that automatically transferred full control to me. At 8:15, I called the bank to verify. The manager's voice was steady, respectful. Mr. Reed, your authority's been restored across all accounts, operating endowment, even the investment portfolios. Mr. Michael Reed's access has been suspended pending review. Thank you, I said, and meant it. 40 years of work, hers and mine, had found its way home. Meanwhile, across town, Michael was giving an interview to a local news outlet about innovation in modern philanthropy. The segment aired live at 9:00 a.m. He was halfway through a sentence about financial transparency when his phone began to vibrate off the table. By 9:07, his office line had gone dead. By 9:15, every account linked to Reed Strategic Media LLC showed a balance of 0. And by 9:30, his executive keycard no longer worked. I didn't have to imagine his reaction. Janet's paralegal, who'd been stationed in the building later, told me what happened. He arrived at the foundation lobby, still in his suit from the night before, trying to swipe his badge again and again until the security guard said quietly, "Sir, your access has been revoked." He demanded answers. They handed him a printed notice with the foundation letterhead. By order of the Trust Contingency Activation, all operational control is reassigned to Trustee Samuel Reed, effective immediately. He'd been dethroned without a single word from me. At 10:02, my phone rang. "Michael, Dad, what the hell is going on?" "What's wrong, son?" I said calmly. "The accounts, the office, my keycard. They said you took everything." "Not everything," I said. "Just what was already mine." "You can't do this. That foundation belonged to your mother," I interrupted. "And she built it for students, not your stock portfolio." There was a pause, long and shaky. "You blindsided me." "You blindsided yourself," I replied. I didn't lift a finger. "You triggered the clause the moment you took that check last night." He cursed under his breath, the kind of sound that makes a father realize the boy he raised is gone and a stranger stands in his place. "I was just trying to grow it," he insisted. "You were trying to own it," I said. "And now you don't own anything." I ended the call before he could answer. At noon, I met Janet at the downtown notary office. She handed me a thin stack of papers, clean, sharp, definitive. The reassignment of authority, the forensic audit request, and the federal filing for nonprofit reinstatement. I signed every page with Eleanor's old fountain pen, the one engraved to my partner in everything. The ink bled slightly at the edges, her favorite blue. When I finished, Janet smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Reed. You're once again the sole steward of the Eleanor Reed Foundation." "It was never about control," I said quietly. "It was about correction." Back at the house, I sat at Eleanor's desk again and turned on the foundation website. Michael's glossy logo had already been replaced by the original one, the one she designed herself in 1998. The words appeared exactly as they should: the Eleanor and Samuel Reed Scholarship Trust Building, Futures Through Faith and Learning. Faith and learning, her two favorite words. Even now, they felt like instructions. At 3:00 p.m., local news stations started calling for comment. Janet handled the press statement. Due to violations of fiduciary integrity, the foundation has reinstated its original trustee, Mr. Samuel Reed. Operations will continue without interruption. No scandal, no shouting match. Just quiet accountability. Still, word spread faster than any headline. By evening, my phone was full of messages, old board members, donors, even former scholarship recipients. "We're glad you're back, Mr. Reed." Eleanor would be proud. Each message felt like a small piece of her returning home. But justice, I learned, doesn't stop at signatures. That night, Janet forwarded me a set of documents flagged by the Charity Commission offshore transfers marketing loans and misreported donations totaling nearly $1.2 million. She called. "Sam, we need to decide whether to pursue criminal charges." "Against my own son?" I asked quietly. "Against anyone who stole from Eleanor," she corrected. I looked out the window at the city skyline, all light and glass and reflection. Maybe that was the problem, too much reflection, not enough soul. "Do it," I said finally. "If the truth hurts him, let it heal him too." That night I found one of Eleanor's old index cards tucked inside her Bible. Her handwriting, still firm after decades, said, "Mercy without justice breeds more sin." I closed the book and whispered, "All right, Ellie. We'll show him both." The next morning the world would see headlines. But tonight I prayed not for punishment, but for revelation. Because sometimes the only way to save someone is to let them lose everything first. By Friday morning, the city already knew. The Seattle Chronicle headline read, "Son of late philanthropist under investigation for misuse of charity funds." Michael's face was on the front page, smiling mid-speech, frozen in arrogance. Beneath it, the caption, "Foundation Control, returned to original trustee Samuel Reed." It didn't feel like victory. It felt like justice wearing mourning clothes. At 10:42 a.m., there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Michael stood there, the same tuxedo from the gala, crumpled, now his tie gone, his hair slicked with rain. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "This is still your mother's house." He walked in slowly, his eyes flicking across the photographs lining the hallway, Eleanor at graduation ceremonies, Eleanor with students, Eleanor with him as a child holding a toy plane. It was as if he was seeing her again for the first time. We sat at the kitchen table. Between us sat a single cup of coffee and the trust binder that had ended his career. "They froze my accounts," he began. "I can't even pay my mortgage." "I know," I said softly. "The IRS will need time to review the audits. You did this, Dad. You humiliated me." "No, son," I replied. "You did that yourself. I just refused to hide it." He slammed his hands on the table, voice cracking. "I was trying to make something bigger. You and Mom were too old-fashioned. I wanted to scale it, modernize it." "By stealing from it?" I asked. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I slid a folder across the table, bank records, invoices, wire transfers. "This isn't modernization," I said. "This is manipulation." He dropped his head into his hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking clock. Then his voice came out small, like the boy who once brought Eleanor wildflowers from the backyard. "I thought she'd be proud if I made it bigger. She would have been proud if you'd kept it honest." He looked up, eyes wet. "What happens now?" Janet filed the reports. "There'll be hearings. Maybe restitution. Maybe probation if you cooperate." "So I'm ruined." "No," I said. "You're broken. There's a difference. Broken things can be rebuilt if you stop pretending they're whole." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and whispered, "I wish Mom were here." "She is," I said, tapping the trust binder. Every page, every signature, that's her voice. You just stopped listening. For a moment, we sat in silence. Then I reached for the Bible on the counter and opened it to a page Eleanor had marked decades ago. Her handwriting in the margin read, "Faith isn't about winning. It's about staying upright when everything tilts." I turned the book toward him. "Read that." He did, his lips barely moving. When he finished, I said, "Faith isn't just believing in God, son. It's believing that truth is still worth standing for when it costs you everything." He nodded, tears sliding down his face. "I don't deserve forgiveness, neither do I said. "That's why it's called grace." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You'll work for the foundation again," I said, "but not as a director. As a volunteer. No salary, no titles. You're serious, absolutely. You'll serve the students your mother loved. Scrub floors, deliver lunches, mentor kids. You'll see what real legacy looks like." He blinked in disbelief, then whispered, "Why would you trust me with that? Because punishment without purpose is cruelty. You'll rebuild what you broke." When he left that afternoon, I watched from the porch as he walked down the wet path toward his car. He stopped, halfway turned, and said, "Dad, thank you for not hating me." "Son," I said quietly, "I'm just doing what your mother would have done, giving you another chance to stand up straight." He nodded, got into the car, and drove away slowly, headlights cutting through the drizzle. That evening, I sat alone in the living room as the rain returned steady and relentless. On the mantel, Eleanor's photo caught the reflection of the lamp. I lifted my glass of wine toward it. "He's learning, Ellie," I whispered. "The hard way, but he's learning." For the first time in months, I felt something deeper than anger, peace. Not because I'd won, but because the truth had. Outside, the city lights shimmered through the fog like 1,000 silent prayers. And in that stillness, I understood what Eleanor had been teaching me all along. You don't need to fight loudly to make things right. You just need to stay steady and let faith finish what you started. 2 weeks after Michael came to my door, the city moved on. Scandals don't last long in Seattle, not when the next tech IPO or mayoral controversy waits around the corner. But for our family, silence didn't mean peace. It meant rebuilding from the ashes of a public fall. Every morning, I drove past the foundation office downtown. The once slick banners that bore Michael's smiling face had been taken down. In their place was a simple brass sign, the Eleanor and Samuel Reed Scholarship Trust, founded 1984, restored 2025. I'd asked the engraver to include that last word deliberately. Restored. Because restoration isn't the same as replacement. It carries the scars of what came before. Inside the office was quieter now. The walls that used to echo with marketing buzzwords were filled with the sound of typewriters, printers, and conversation. Students, the kind of kids Eleanor loved, came in for mentorship meetings. One young woman, a nursing major from Tacoma, told me, "Sir, your wife's story helped me keep studying when my mom got sick. I hope I can do what she did someday." I smiled, remembering how Eleanor used to say, hope was a kind of currency, and the only one that never devalued. Michael hadn't returned to his penthouse in Capitol Hill. He'd sold it quietly, moved into a small apartment near Lake Union, and started showing up at the foundation at 7:00 every morning. No chauffeur, no designer suits, just jeans, rolled sleeves, and silence. He didn't ask for sympathy. He didn't post on social media. He worked. The first few days, the volunteers didn't know what to do with him. Some avoided him. Others whispered. Then, one afternoon, I found him in the supply room, labeling boxes of donated textbooks. He didn't notice me at first. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, his hands stained with marker ink. "These kids deserve new materials," he muttered. "We can't keep giving them old editions." It wasn't much, but it was something real. That night when I told Janet about it, she smiled and said, "You wanted him to learn humility. Looks like he's getting the lesson." Meanwhile, the board of directors voted unanimously to relaunch the foundation's mission under its original charter scholarships for students pursuing healthcare degrees. I'd redirected $1.8 million from the endowment into a new initiative, the Eleanor Reed Medical Fellowship, providing full rides for medical students who pledged to work in underserved communities for at least 5 years. When the local paper interviewed me, I said simply, "We're not starting over. We're continuing what Eleanor began serving, not selling." The article ran with the headline, "Faith Restored, the Rebirth of a Seattle Legacy." For the first time, the press didn't want a scandal. They wanted the story of how one family rebuilt trust, literally. One afternoon, I walked into the office and found Michael reading a stack of letters from past scholarship recipients. He looked up, his eyes red. "Dad, did you know one of these kids became a cancer researcher at Fred Hutchinson? He said Mom's scholarship kept him from dropping out." "Your mother believed one act of kindness could ripple for decades," I said. "I used to think legacy meant power," he admitted quietly. "Now I think it just means consistency." That word consistency made me smile. Eleanor would have loved hearing him say it. That Sunday, we held a small community service in the foundation courtyard to honor Eleanor's birthday. No tuxedos, no champagne, just 50 people, most of them former scholarship students and neighborhood families. A small choir sang, "It is well with my soul." I stood beside the bronze statue we'd commissioned of Eleanor, holding a book in one hand and reaching out with the other frozen mid-gift. When it was my turn to speak, I said, "She believed education wasn't just about classrooms. It was about character, about showing up even when it isn't profitable." The audience nodded. A few people cried. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Michael standing near the back. No cameras, no fanfare, just listening. Afterward, he came up to me and handed me a folded piece of paper. "It's a proposal," he said. "A mentorship program for students who lost a parent to cancer. I want to run it under supervision, of course." Why, I asked. "Because I can't bring Mom back, but I can keep her going." I didn't say anything for a while. Then I nodded. "Submit it Monday. We'll review it like any other program." He smiled faintly, a real smile this time, not the polished one from magazine covers. That night, as I locked up the office, I walked past the new donor wall. Eleanor's quote glimmered under the soft lights. "Faith is the blueprint. Love is the structure. Work is the proof." I traced the words with my finger and whispered, "We're getting there, Ellie. Slowly, but we're getting there." When I stepped outside, rain had started again, soft, unthreatening, like forgiveness. And for the first time, I didn't dread it. Because this time I wasn't standing in the storm. I was walking through it toward something rebuilt, honest, and holy in its simplicity. Spring in Seattle has a way of forgiving things. The city wakes up, slow cherry blossoms painting sidewalks, pink fairy horns echoing across Elliott Bay, and people walking just a little slower, as if learning how to breathe again. That was how it felt the morning of the Eleanor Reed Medical Fellowship ceremony. Not flashy, not triumphant, just peaceful. The event was held in the auditorium of the University of Washington Medical Center, the same hospital where Eleanor had received her treatments. It had been 10 months since her passing. 10 months since the night Michael turned her dream into a brand. 10 months since we turned it back into a mission. I arrived early carrying the folder with the fellowship recipients' names. Each student represented a seed Eleanor had planted years ago, young doctors who promised to serve rural and low-income communities. The kind of work that doesn't make headlines, but saves lives quietly. When I stepped onto the stage to greet the first group, I glanced down at the front row and froze. Michael was there. No cameras, no entourage, no designer suit. Just a simple navy blazer, a white shirt, and a small paper program folded in his hands until the edges curled. He looked nervous, but for the first time he also looked present. The dean gave opening remarks about Eleanor's contributions to education and healthcare access. Then he announced, "Before we introduce our fellowship recipients, one of our trustees has asked to share a few words." I hadn't planned on speaking, so when Michael stood up and began walking toward the stage, I felt my heart tighten. He wasn't on the program, but nobody stopped him. He climbed the steps, slowly gripping the railing, then turned to face the audience. For a second, he just stood there in silence, hands trembling slightly. Then he said, "My name is Michael Reed. Some of you may know me as Eleanor's son. Others may know me for less flattering reasons." A few people shifted uncomfortably. He took a deep breath. "I came here today, not as a director, not as a spokesman, not even as a donor, but as a son who failed to understand what legacy really means." The room was silent. Last year I thought success meant visibility, more money, more recognition, more reach. But what my father reminded me, and what my mother built her whole life around, was something quieter. Legacy isn't about having your name on a building. It's about keeping your promise to serve others even when no one's watching. He paused, then looked straight at me in the front row. "Dad, I'm sorry. For erasing you, for misusing what she trusted me with, and for forgetting that this foundation was born out of faith, not ego." My throat tightened. The man on that stage wasn't the polished marketer I'd watched destroy our reputation. He was my son again, stripped of ambition, clothed in humility. The audience didn't clap at first, but when he stepped back from the microphone, a few students began to rise, applauding quietly. Then the applause spread steady and sincere. It wasn't for spectacle, it was for sincerity. When it was my turn to speak, I joined him on stage. We didn't plan it, but when I reached the microphone, I placed my hand on his shoulder and said, "This foundation was built on 3 words." Eleanor repeated every day: faith, service, and accountability. My son forgot the third for a while, but he remembered the first 2 when it mattered. The crowd laughed softly, then applauded again. I continued. Eleanor believed in second chances, in giving people space to grow instead of walls to climb. That's why we're here today, not to celebrate money, but to celebrate mercy. Michael nodded, his eyes wet. When we walked off stage together, he whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I didn't," I said. "Your mother didn't either." After the ceremony, students lined up to shake our hands. One young woman, a first-year medical student named Amira, said softly, "Mr. Reed, your wife's scholarship is the reason I can study. I want to be a pediatric oncologist." I smiled. "Then you'll finish what Eleanor started." Amira hesitated, then handed me a folded letter. "Your wife wrote me last year before she passed. She said, 'If you ever doubt your purpose, remember someone once prayed for you to have it.'" My hands shook as I unfolded the letter later that night. Eleanor's handwriting, graceful, firm, full of warmth, filled the page. She'd written to the very students who now carried her legacy forward. And somehow, through her words, she was still teaching all of us. That evening, the sunset over Lake Washington painted the sky in gold, and rose Eleanor's favorite colors. Michael and I stood outside the hospital garden, where the foundation had planted a small magnolia tree in her honor. He reached into his pocket and handed me something small and metallic. It was his old keycard, the one deactivated the morning after the gala. "I think this belongs with her now," he said. He placed it at the base of the tree beside a small plaque that read, "To serve, not to be seen." For a long while we stood there in silence, watching the petals fall onto the grass. When the breeze picked up, Michael whispered, "You think she forgives me? She already did," I said. "Before you even asked." He nodded, and for the first time in years, I saw peace settle across his face, the kind that doesn't come from success, but from surrender. Later that night, as I drove home through the glowing streets, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord, for giving me back my son, and thank you for letting Eleanor's light keep working through both of us." Faith had rebuilt what failure destroyed. Grace had rewritten the ending. And love, the quiet kind Eleanor always practiced, had turned loss into legacy. By the time autumn came again, the air in Seattle carried the same soft chill it had the year Eleanor passed. But something was different now. The foundation no longer felt like a business. It felt like a heartbeat. In 12 months, the Eleanor and Samuel Reed Medical Fellowship had sponsored 28 medical students across 5 states. Eleanor's name now appeared not in advertisements or glossy brochures, but in handwritten thank you notes pinned to the office wall. One read, "Dear Mr. Reed, because of your wife's fellowship, I can afford to finish nursing school. I promise to use what she gave me to heal others. Mia class of 2020. Another came from a small town in Montana. When I treat my first patient, I'll think of Mrs. Reed, the woman who believed even small towns deserved doctors. Every note was a prayer, answered, a promise fulfilled. Michael was the first to arrive at the office every morning. He handled logistics, student follow-ups, donation tracking, the kind of quiet, unglamorous work he used to delegate. Sometimes I'd find him sweeping the front steps before donors arrived. He never complained. He didn't have to say he'd changed. His actions said it for him. At night, we'd close the office together, locking the doors side by side. One evening, I caught him staring at the portrait of Eleanor hanging in the lobby. It showed her mid-laugh, eyes, bright hair, silvering hands clasped like she was about to tell a secret. Michael said softly, "She doesn't look disappointed anymore." "She never was," I replied. "Just waiting for you to catch up." He smiled faintly, and for the first time I saw the man she'd hoped he'd become. In late October, the foundation was invited to Washington, D.C. to receive the National Service and Compassion Award. I hadn't planned on attending. Eleanor never liked attention, and truth be told, neither did I. But Michael insisted, "Mom built something that deserves to be recognized. This isn't about fame, it's about faith in action." So we went. The ceremony was held in the Library of Congress under the same dome where Eleanor had once given a speech about equitable education in 2004. I remember she'd ended that speech with the line, "Love is the only currency that multiplies when you spend it." When they announced our foundation's name, Michael nudged me. "You should go up," he whispered. "No," I said. "You're her son. You go." He hesitated, then took the stage. He didn't boast. He didn't use corporate slogans. He just said, "This isn't an award for me or my father. It's for every student who's ever worked harder because someone believed in them." The applause wasn't thunderous, it was warm, respectful, real. Exactly how Eleanor would have wanted it. Afterward, one of the judges approached me privately. "Your wife's story inspired us all," she said. "But what touched us most was how you turned a scandal into service. That kind of redemption isn't common." I smiled, glancing at Michael across the room, chatting with 2 students. "It wasn't redemption," I said. It was a lesson that finally sank in. Back home, the house felt alive again. Eleanor's piano no longer sat silent. Michael had hired a young student from the fellowship program, a girl named Clara, to give lessons to neighborhood kids there every Wednesday. Laughter and music filled the rooms that once echoed only with rain. I'd sit in the armchair with my coffee watching them play scales while sunlight poured through the lace curtains. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a museum. It felt like a continuation. One afternoon, while reorganizing Eleanor's old teaching materials, I found a sealed envelope wedged inside her planner. It was addressed in her handwriting, "For Sam, when the work feels finished." I smiled. She always knew I'd never stop tinkering. Inside was a single page written in the same blue ink she'd used for every important thing in our lives. My love, if you're reading this, then it means the mission is safe. I can rest, and you can breathe again. Don't measure the success of our life by money or recognition. Measure it by whether you can still find peace in silence. Promise me one thing: when the world finally stops demanding from you, you'll sit in the garden and just let it be. I'll be there listening to the wind with you. Eleanor. The paper trembled in my hands. It wasn't sorrow that made me cry. It was gratitude. Because somehow, even after all the noise, she'd led me right back to quiet. That weekend, I kept her promise. I sat in the garden she'd planted decades ago, hydrangeas, lavender, and the white lilies she loved most. The city hummed softly in the distance, but here there was only windbirds and the creak of the old wooden bench beneath me. Michael came outside a few minutes later, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He sat beside me without saying a word. We didn't need to. The garden was enough. The silence was enough. Faith had done its work. It's been 5 years since that garden afternoon. I'm 79 now, and people still ask me why I never retired, why I still walk into the foundation every morning with my old briefcase and a thermos of coffee that leaks if I tilt it too much. The answer's simple. I'm not working anymore. I'm witnessing. I watch the cycle. Eleanor and I started keep spinning forward, students graduating, new doctors returning as mentors, nurses sending postcards from clinics they built in small towns, whose names most donors can't pronounce. Every corner of that building now carries her laughter in some form. Even the elevator walls have handwritten quotes from her lesson plans. My favorite one is near the lobby. Character is the longest investment. It always matures on time. Eleanor was right. Her investment matured in people, not portfolios. The Eleanor and Samuel Reed Foundation now runs medical scholarships in 8 states and partnerships with 3 hospitals. Michael manages operations with a quiet discipline that still surprises me. He doesn't sign press releases anymore. He doesn't need to. His leadership shows in the way he holds doors for students, in how he stays late to review grant proposals line by line. Every December, he visits his mother's magnolia tree at the hospital courtyard and places a single keycard under the plaque, a small ritual to remember the year everything changed. Each card represents another layer of pride he's shed, another year of service freely given. And me, I've learned that fatherhood isn't about shaping your children into the people you want. It's about standing firm enough that when they finally fall, they know where to land. A few months ago, a journalist from the Seattle Herald came to interview me for an article about late-life leadership. She was young, polite, full of questions about scandal and redemption. At one point, she asked Mr. Reed, "What would you say to families torn apart by ambition?" I thought about that for a long while. Then I said, "Love them enough to let them feel the consequences. Don't confuse forgiveness with permission. And when they return, Make sure the door's open, but the rules haven't changed. She smiled and said, "That sounds like faith." I nodded. Faith isn't waiting for miracles. It's doing the small right thing long enough for God to turn it into something bigger. She printed that quote in the article. I didn't mind. It wasn't really mine anyway. It belonged to Eleanor. Last month, the hospital unveiled a new wing built partly from the fellowship's endowment, the Eleanor Reed Center for Compassionate Medicine. They asked me to cut the ribbon, but I let Michael do it. He stood on stage in a plain suit, his voice steady, his smile humble. He didn't talk about himself. He talked about her, about the way she'd read bedtime stories to him and make him promise to build things that last. Then he said, "This center isn't a monument to perfection. It's proof that redemption can build stronger foundations than pride ever could." The applause was soft, but endless. I looked at him and realized Eleanor's work wasn't finished. It had just changed hands again. Now in the evenings, I sit by the window of our old house watching the streetlights blink on across the hill. Sometimes Michael drops by with takeout, sometimes with letters from students who've graduated. We eat, we laugh, we tell stories about her, the woman who turned faith into an action plan. Her presence is everywhere in the lilies by the garden gate, in the laughter from piano lessons, in the quiet confidence of the young doctors who stop by to say thank you. Even the house creaks in familiar ways when the wind comes through. It's as if she never left, she just expanded. I know my own time is winding down. My hands shake a little when I write now, and I forget things mid-sentence. But that's all right. I've learned that legacy doesn't require your presence to stay alive. It just needs your integrity while you're here. When I'm gone, Michael and the board will keep it going. They don't need another lecture from me. They've already got her words carved in bronze outside the foundation door, to serve, not to be seen. That was Eleanor's real will. Not money, not property. Just a sentence. A North Star. So if you're watching this, wherever you are, maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you've been betrayed. Maybe you're standing in the ruins of something you built with love. Hear me clearly. You can start again. You can build again. But you must build with truth, or you'll spend your life repairing lies. And if you ever doubt that faith can rebuild what pride destroyed, just remember this story. Because I'm living proof that it can. And so was she. If this story touched you, please subscribe to Brian's Stories. Share it with someone who believes in second chances, and tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what legacy are you building? Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more truth spoken softly, lived fully, and left behind with love.